She chose you, the Apache women told the rancher who saved their wounded sister. The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide stretches of desert when the rancher stepped out of his small cabin. The morning air was crisp and dry, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. He had lived on this land for many years, learning to understand its rhythms and its silence. Life here was hard, and he had grown used to working alone, tending to the few cattle he owned, mending fences, and riding out to check the farthest corners of his land. People seldom came near. The land had taught him patience, and the long hours of solitude had taught him to listen, not just to the animals and the wind, but to the quiet voice inside himself. On this particular morning, he noticed something unusual. A faint movement caught his eye near the rocky outcrop at the edge of his property. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or one of the wild dogs that sometimes wandered into the area, but as he approached carefully, he realized it was human. A figure lay crumpled on the dusty ground, barely moving. The rancher's heart quickened. It was a young woman, her face pale and streaked with dirt, her clothes torn and soaked with blood. She had clearly been hurt, and he could see that she was struggling to stay alive. Despite his usual caution around strangers, something inside him stirred. The thought of leaving her there to die was unbearable. He dismounted from his horse and knelt beside her, examining the wounds as best he could. She had been attacked or injured somehow. He couldn't tell exactly what had happened. There was a deep cut on her leg and another on her arm, and she seemed too weak to stand. The rancher knew he had to act quickly. He lifted her carefully, speaking in soft, steady tones, hoping to offer some comfort even though he didn't know if she could understand his words. "You're going to be okay. I've got you," he said, more to steady his own hands than hers. She let out a faint groan but did not resist. Her eyes were half closed, filled with pain and confusion. He could see fear there too, fear of him, of being far from her people, of the unknown. He whispered again, urging her to hold on, and adjusted the blanket he had laid over his saddle to cushion her as best he could. The ride back to his cabin was long and bumpy. Each bump of the horse caused her to wince, and he held her as steady as possible. All the while, he kept talking to her, telling her she would be safe, that he would not let anything happen to her. He had never been a man given to grand displays of emotion, but there was a tenderness in his care that even he found surprising. By the time he reached the cabin, he was sweating from the effort, his hands sore, but he did not stop. He laid her gently on a bed of blankets on the cabin floor, ensuring she was warm and comfortable, and went to fetch water and clean cloths for her wounds. The woman's breathing was shallow, and he could see the strain on her face. He worked quickly but carefully, cleaning the cuts and dressing them with the few supplies he had. He had learned some basic first aid from travelers and books he had picked up over the years, but this was different. She needed more than just bandages. She needed time, attention, and care. He remained with her, speaking softly, keeping her aware of his presence so she would not feel alone. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, but he did not leave her side. As she began to stabilize, the rancher reflected on how strange life could be. He had spent so many years alone, content in the simplicity of his daily routines, and yet here he was, drawn into someone else's struggle. There was something about her resilience, the quiet determination that shone through even in her pain, that inspired him. He saw a reflection of his own strength in her, and yet he recognized that her strength was different. It was delicate, patient, and unspoken. By the evening, the woman was resting more comfortably. She still looked weak and fragile, but the danger of immediate harm had passed. The rancher sat nearby, tending to the fire and keeping watch, ensuring no wild animals wandered too close, and that the wind did not bring dust into her wounds. He felt a strange sense of responsibility settle over him, heavier than anything he had ever carried before. This was not just a task or a duty, it was a life he was entrusted with, and the weight of that trust pressed upon him. The next few days followed a careful routine. Each morning he would check her wounds, clean them, and bring her fresh water and food, while she remained mostly silent, observing him with cautious eyes. She was wary, as anyone would be after such a frightening experience, but there was also a sense of trust beginning to grow. She began to respond to his simple words, sometimes nodding or whispering in a language he did not understand. He learned to interpret her gestures, the tilt of her head, the movement of her eyes. Slowly, a bridge of understanding was forming, fragile but strong enough to support the beginnings of communication. The rancher was aware that others in the nearby settlements might not approve of his actions. Taking in someone from outside his own world was risky, and there could be backlash or suspicion. Yet, he felt no fear of that. His concern was entirely for her well-being. Each day, as he saw her grow a little stronger, his relief and pride grew as well. The sound of her weak but steady breathing was a comfort, and the faint smile that occasionally crossed her lips gave him hope that she would recover fully. In the evenings, he would sit by the fire, sometimes speaking quietly, sometimes just watching her sleep. He began to understand the importance of patience and presence. It was not enough to simply tend to her wounds. He needed to be there, consistently, offering a sense of safety and stability. The experience was teaching him something profound about compassion and humanity. He realized that courage was not always about facing danger in the open. Sometimes, it was about staying, quietly, in the service of someone else's survival. The woman's condition gradually improved. She began to sit up, then to stand with his support, her strength returning slowly but steadily. Each small step was a triumph, and the rancher celebrated them in his own quiet way. He was careful not to overwhelm her, allowing her to move at her own pace, respecting her space and autonomy. In those moments, he felt a connection that transcended words, a bond built on mutual respect and the shared experience of survival. By the end of the first week, she was able to eat more solid food and speak in short phrases, using the few words he had taught her. Their conversations were limited, yet meaningful. They learned about each other's worlds, he about hers, she about his. In the process, he discovered the depth of her courage and wisdom. Despite her youth, she had endured hardship and pain with a dignity that left him humbled. The rancher knew the journey ahead would be long. Her recovery was not complete, and there would be challenges to overcome. But he also knew that he would not abandon her. This was no longer just about saving a life. It was about standing beside someone as they rebuilt it. He felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before, a quiet determination to see her through, no matter what obstacles arose. The days passed, each one a step forward. He found joy in the small victories, her first full meal, the first time she walked without support, the first time she laughed at something he said. These moments, simple and unassuming, were treasures. They reminded him that life, even in its harshest conditions, could be beautiful, especially when shared with someone who had fought so hard to stay alive. And so, life on the ranch began to change. The solitary man who had once known only the rhythm of the land now knew the rhythm of another's recovery, the fragile heartbeat of someone who had been on the edge of death. It was a new life, filled with uncertainty but also with hope. The rancher did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would continue to care for her, patiently and steadfastly, until she was strong again. And perhaps, in doing so, he would discover a deeper understanding of courage, kindness, and the bonds that could form between two very different worlds. The days following her arrival at the ranch were quiet, yet they were filled with small, important tasks. The rancher moved around his cabin with careful precision, bringing water, food, and clean cloths for the woman. He watched her closely, noticing every flicker of discomfort or weakness. Her injuries were serious, and her body needed time to heal. He understood that he could not rush her recovery, Every day would bring small victories and setbacks, and patience was the only way forward. She remained mostly silent in those first days, speaking only a few words in a language he did not fully understand. At first, she avoided eye contact, curling herself into the blankets as if the world outside might still pose danger. Yet, despite her wariness, he could see glimpses of intelligence and resilience in her eyes. Each time she managed to sit up slightly, even for a moment, he felt a surge of relief and pride. He learned to encourage her gently, offering a hand or speaking softly, letting her know he was there to help, not to control. The rancher was careful not to overwhelm her. He understood that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He spoke to her softly, repeating simple words over and over so she could begin to associate them with their meanings. Water, food, rest, safe. He also learned to interpret her gestures, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes would widen or narrow. Communication became a quiet dance, one that required patience, attention, and respect. Slowly she began to respond, sometimes nodding or whispering words he recognized, and each small exchange deepened their understanding. During the day, he would tend to his chores while keeping an ear tuned to her needs. If she groaned in discomfort, he would pause immediately, rushing to her side to offer assistance. When she asked for water or food, he would provide it, making sure it was at a temperature she could manage and in a way that would not aggravate her injuries. Each time he saw her eat without difficulty or move without pain, he felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you have made a real difference in someone's life. In the evenings, the rancher would sit by her side, tending the fire and keeping watch. The wind often swept across the plains with a sharp chill, and he knew that exposure could set back her recovery. He ensured the blankets were tucked around her, and he would speak to her quietly, sometimes telling stories of his life on the ranch, the work he did, the animals he cared for, and the solitude he had learned to accept. She listened in silence at first, her eyes alert, absorbing every word. Over time, she began to respond with small nods or gestures, showing that she understood even if she could not yet speak fully. The rancher also began to notice her strength, not just in her physical resilience but in her spirit. Despite the pain she had endured and the fear that lingered in her eyes, she remained composed, observing him and the world around her with sharp attention. She learned quickly, adapting to the routines of the cabin, helping in small ways when she could. Even the smallest contributions, holding a cloth, reaching for water, adjusting a blanket, felt like triumphs to both of them. Each day, she became a little more self-sufficient, and he could see her confidence growing alongside her strength. He also began to reflect on the world she came from. He had known other travelers and some members of the local Apache communities, but he realized that this woman carried the experience of hardship and survival that was entirely her own. He wondered what had happened to her before he found her, what dangers she had faced, and how she had managed to endure. He did not press for answers, knowing that she would share her story when she was ready. For now, he focused on providing safety, nourishment, and care, understanding that healing the body often came before telling the story. The rancher's neighbors were aware of the woman's presence, though few visited. Rumors and whispers spread about the solitary man taking in someone from another world. Some questioned his judgment, while others admired his courage and kindness. The rancher paid little attention to their opinions. He knew that life on the ranch required independence and trust in one's own judgment. This was not about social approval. It was about ensuring that the woman survived and regained her strength. The opinions of others mattered little compared to the responsibility he now bore. As the days turned into a week, the woman began to show remarkable progress. She could lift herself from the blankets, sit in a chair, and even walk short distances with support. Each milestone brought quiet joy to the rancher. He would smile, sometimes softly laugh, and encourage her gently. "Good," he would say. "You're doing well, that's it." His tone was calm, never forceful, allowing her to feel in control of her own recovery. Slowly, she began to speak more, using the few words she knew in English and responding with short phrases in her own language. They learned to communicate in a mixture of gestures, simple words, and understanding glances. In these moments, a bond began to form. It was quiet, understated, and built on trust and shared experience. The rancher learned to respect her independence while offering care, and she learned to accept help without fear. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience and sensitivity. There were times when she would grow frustrated, attempting to do more than her body allowed, and he would gently guide her back, reminding her that recovery was a process. There were also times when he felt helpless, wishing he could do more, but he learned that presence and steady care often mattered more than grand gestures. The rancher also began to see the emotional impact of her ordeal. Moments of fear or anxiety would appear in her eyes, reflecting memories of danger or loss. He spoke to her softly in these times, offering reassurance and stability. "You're safe here," he would say. "No one can hurt you now." Slowly, she began to relax, her shoulders dropping from the tension they had carried, her breathing becoming steadier. It was clear that trust was growing, and with trust came healing, not just of the body but of the spirit. He noticed her small rituals, the ways she cared for herself in the cabin. She would wash her hands carefully, arrange her blankets just so, and watch the movements of the sun and the animals outside. These actions were subtle, yet they revealed a deep connection to life and survival. The rancher admired her attention to detail, recognizing it as a form of resilience and intelligence. Each day, he learned a little more about her world, and she learned a little about his. It was a slow, delicate dance of understanding across cultures and experiences, but it worked. Evenings were often the most rewarding. After tending to her needs, they would sit near the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly. He would share stories of life on the ranch, of the animals he cared for, of the long stretches of solitude, and the small joys he found in daily labor. She would listen intently, sometimes offering a word or gesture in response, showing comprehension and engagement. These moments, though quiet, were rich in connection. They marked the beginning of a true bond, one formed not by words alone but by shared experience, trust, and care. As the second week approached, the woman's recovery was evident. She moved with greater ease, her breathing steadier, her eyes brighter. She was still cautious, still learning to trust the unfamiliar, but she was growing stronger each day. The rancher took pride in her progress, yet he remained vigilant, understanding that recovery was a fragile process. Any misstep, any rush could set her back. He was determined to stay patient, to remain present, and to ensure that she could rebuild not only her strength but her confidence in the world around her. Through it all, the rancher discovered something profound about himself. Caring for another human being in such an intimate and essential way had awakened emotions and insights he had long neglected. He realized that kindness, patience, and attentiveness were forms of courage. He saw that true strength was not measured in physical prowess or independence alone, but in the capacity to care, to support, and to trust. This experience, he understood, was shaping him as much as it was shaping her recovery. In quiet moments, he would watch her sleep and reflect on the journey they were sharing. She had endured hardships he could scarcely imagine, and yet she had survived. Her courage and resilience inspired him daily. Each day, each small achievement, was a testament to human endurance and the capacity for healing. He felt privileged to witness her recovery and honored to play a role in it. And so, life at the ranch settled into a careful rhythm. The days were filled with work, care, and small joys, the nights with watchfulness and quiet reflection. The rancher and the woman were learning from each other, growing stronger together, and forging a connection that neither had anticipated. What had begun as a desperate act of rescue was transforming into something deeper, a shared journey of survival, trust, and understanding. The rancher knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew that together, they could navigate it, step by careful step, toward healing and hope. Weeks had passed since the rancher had brought the wounded woman into his cabin. The days were filled with work, healing, and careful attention to her recovery, and over time, a quiet bond had formed between them. She moved with greater confidence now, able to walk short distances without his help, and her strength was returning steadily. But one morning, as the rancher went to check on her, he noticed something unusual, a distant figure moving across the hills toward the cabin. He mounted his horse and rode closer, squinting against the sun. The figure multiplied into several more, and he realized with growing concern that a small group of Apache women was approaching. His mind raced. He had expected visitors from the nearby settlements, perhaps neighbors checking on him, but not her people. He did not know how they would react. They might be angry, accusing him of kidnapping or harming her. The thought made his chest tighten. He had acted out of compassion, yet he knew that intentions often mattered little when fear and mistrust were involved. As the women drew closer, the rancher dismounted, trying to appear calm and non-threatening. He walked slowly toward them, raising a hand in greeting. The women stopped a short distance away, their eyes sharp and observant. They were strong, proud, and wary, carrying the weight of responsibility for their sister. He could sense both their caution and their concern. The rancher knew he had to act carefully. Any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. One of the women stepped forward, her face lined with experience and determination. She looked directly at him, assessing his character in a way that was both fearless and deliberate. He bowed his head slightly, a silent gesture of respect. "She is safe," he said softly, hoping that his tone would convey his sincerity. "I have cared for her. She is healing." The women exchanged glances, speaking softly among themselves. The rancher could not understand the words, but he could feel the tension in the air. He waited patiently, keeping his hands visible and his posture open. He had learned over the past weeks that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He hoped that his actions, not just his words, would demonstrate his good intentions. Slowly, one of the women moved closer to the cabin. The rancher stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The wounded woman, now seated on a blanket, looked up at the newcomers with a mixture of surprise and recognition. Her eyes brightened slightly, and she gave a faint nod. She had been worried for her family, and now she could see them before her. The rancher felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The reunion could either go smoothly or become complicated very quickly. The matriarch of the group approached the woman carefully, kneeling beside her to examine her wounds. She spoke softly, in words the rancher did not understand, and the woman responded, gesturing with her hands and occasionally speaking in short phrases. It was clear that the matriarch was trying to understand her condition, while the others watched attentively. The rancher stood back, observing quietly, and marveled at the intensity of their concern. He realized that family bonds, trust, and responsibility ran deep in this community, and their approach to care was both gentle and deliberate. He noticed that the women carried supplies of their own, herbs, cloths, and small tools that could aid in her recovery. They began to clean and dress her wounds in ways he had never seen, using techniques passed down through generations. He watched respectfully, recognizing the depth of knowledge and tradition in their care. Although their methods were different, the goal was the same, to ensure her well-being. The rancher felt both admiration and humility. He had saved her life, but it was clear that her true healing required the presence and guidance of her own people. One of the women turned to the rancher, speaking in a tone that was firm but not hostile. He could sense that she was trying to convey gratitude, although he did not understand the words. She gestured toward the woman, then toward him, and repeated the words with emphasis. He caught the intent. They recognized that he had cared for her, protected her, and helped her survive. Relief washed over him. He had feared anger, yet instead he was met with appreciation. The matriarch then addressed the woman directly, and the rancher could see the exchange in their expressions and gestures. The woman listened carefully, responding with small nods and a quiet smile. The rancher realized that her family was giving her a choice, respecting her autonomy in a way that was both empowering and profound. She could stay with him if she wished, or return with them. The decision was hers alone, and that respect moved him deeply. Over the next few hours, the women worked alongside the rancher to ensure that she was comfortable and ready for travel if she chose to leave. The rancher provided what he could: food, water, blankets, but deferred to their expertise and knowledge. He observed how carefully they moved, how tenderly they spoke, and how attuned they were to her needs. In their presence, he felt both admiration and a renewed understanding of compassion. It was a lesson in humility and care that he would carry with him forever. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the matriarch stood and looked at the rancher directly. There was a weight in her gaze, a recognition of the role he had played in her sister's survival. Then she spoke words that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "She chose you." The rancher felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of surprise, humility, and quiet pride. It was not just a statement about his actions. It was a recognition of trust, courage, and the bond that had formed between them. The woman herself looked at him, her eyes steady and clear. She had been given a choice, and in that moment she affirmed it through her gaze. The rancher felt the responsibility of that decision settle over him. He understood that this was not about ownership or possession. It was about respect, mutual understanding, and the acknowledgement of the connection that had grown over weeks of care and attention. The Apache women prepared to leave, ensuring that she was ready to return to her community if that was her choice. The rancher helped with their supplies, carrying water and blankets to the edge of the cabin. He watched as they moved with precision and care, their presence commanding yet gentle. He was struck by the deep sense of loyalty and responsibility they carried, not just for their sister, but for each other. It was a bond that transcended words, built on trust, respect, and shared history. Throughout the visit, the rancher observed how the woman interacted with her family. There was a quiet joy, tempered by the awareness of her recent suffering. She moved with more confidence, responded with clearer speech, and smiled more openly than she had in weeks. The rancher felt a mixture of happiness and melancholy. He had grown attached to her presence, yet he understood that her place was with her people. The lesson of letting go, he realized, was as important as the lesson of caring for another human being. Before they departed, the matriarch spoke again, her tone firm yet warm. She acknowledged the rancher's kindness, his courage, and the care he had provided. In their customs, words were powerful and gestures even more so. She handed him a small token, a simple item from their community, as a mark of respect and gratitude. The rancher accepted it with humility, understanding the depth of meaning behind the gesture. It was a reminder that acts of kindness and bravery did not go unnoticed, even across worlds and cultures. As the women and the young woman prepared to leave, the rancher felt a sense of closure mixed with hope. He knew that he had played a vital role in her survival, that he had helped her reclaim strength and trust, and that he had earned the respect of her people. Yet he also understood that this was only the beginning of her journey, and that she was returning to a world that would continue to shape and guide her. He could only watch, silently wishing her safety and happiness, and trusting that the bond they had formed would endure beyond distance. After they had departed, the rancher returned to his cabin, the quiet settling around him once again. He felt a mixture of pride, relief, and reflection. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he had acted with compassion and courage. He had discovered the power of patience, trust, and mutual respect. And in the process, he had witnessed a remarkable lesson in human connection, one that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. In the days that followed, he would think often of the woman and her family. He would remember the quiet intensity of the matriarch's gaze, the careful movements of the women as they cared for their sister, and the simple, powerful words that had resonated deeply. "She chose you." It was a phrase that carried weight, meaning, and recognition, and it reminded him that sometimes true understanding and trust are earned through actions, not words alone. The rancher returned to his daily life, tending his land and animals, but with a new awareness. He had been touched by an experience that challenged his solitude, expanded his understanding of humanity, and revealed the strength that emerges from care and compassion. And though the woman had returned to her community, the memory of her resilience, courage, and the trust she had placed in him would remain, shaping the way he lived, thought, and understood the world around him for years to come. The days after the visit of the Apache women were quiet at the ranch, but the memory of that encounter lingered heavily in the rancher's mind. Every detail, the cautious steps of the women, the gentle way they cared for the wounded sister, the matriarch's steady gaze, and the words, "She chose you," remained vivid. He had felt a mix of emotions, pride, humility, awe, and a quiet sadness knowing that the young woman he had nurtured might not remain with him. The experience had changed him more than he realized, shifting something deep inside. He went about his daily chores, tending to the cattle and repairing fences, but his thoughts were often elsewhere. He replayed the moments when the young woman had looked at him, her eyes steady and clear, making the decision for herself. It was a strange feeling, joy at seeing her regain her strength and independence, tempered by the ache of knowing that their lives would now diverge. The rancher had learned something vital. Care, courage, and respect were not about possession or control. They were about understanding, trust, and the willingness to let someone make their own choices. Over the next few days, the rancher found himself thinking about what the Apache women had taught him. Their presence, quiet but commanding, had revealed a depth of knowledge and wisdom that was entirely new to him. He marveled at their patience, their attentiveness, and the gentle authority with which they guided their sister's recovery. He began to realize that healing was not just a matter of treating wounds. It was about presence, respect, and a profound understanding of human strength. Their ways, so different from his own, had something vital to teach him. He also noticed subtle changes in the young woman's behavior during her brief stay after the visit. She seemed calmer, more assured, as if the reunion with her family had given her an anchor. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, the way she spoke, and the way she interacted with the rancher. He saw that her experience of being cared for by her own people, combined with the care he had provided, had given her a sense of security and empowerment. She had survived, and now she was learning to thrive, a reminder of how resilience and support could transform a person's spirit. One afternoon, as he worked on repairing a fence near the edge of the property, he noticed movement in the distance. A small figure appeared on horseback, riding with purpose. His heart leapt, unsure of who it could be. As the rider approached, he realized it was the young woman, alone this time. She had returned. The rancher's surprise was tempered by relief. He dismounted quickly and hurried to meet her, unsure of what to expect. She smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement that she had made a choice. No words were needed to convey her decision. Her eyes and demeanor said it all. They spent hours talking, slowly and carefully, using a combination of gestures, short words, and patient listening. She explained, as best she could, that she had felt the pull of her family and her community, but also the bond that had formed between them. The rancher listened intently, understanding the courage it must have taken for her to return. It was not a decision made lightly, and it carried the weight of trust and mutual respect. He felt honored that she had chosen to return, yet he knew that this choice was hers alone, and he could not take it for granted. As the days passed, their routine resumed, but it was now enriched by a deeper sense of understanding. The rancher continued to care for her in practical ways, preparing food, ensuring she was rested, helping her with tasks, but he also paid attention to the emotional bond they shared. They began to communicate more freely, exploring ideas, sharing thoughts, and expressing feelings. He found that the young woman had a quiet wisdom, the kind that comes from experiencing hardship and surviving it. Her observations were sharp, insightful, and often surprising, revealing layers of understanding he had not expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the rancher and the young woman sat outside near the fire. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and the sounds of the land, cattle lowing in the distance, the rustle of the trees, filled the air. The rancher realized how much he had come to appreciate these moments of quiet connection. It was not just about survival or healing, it was about presence, understanding, and shared humanity. In the stillness, they were learning from each other, growing together, and finding meaning beyond the routines of daily life. The young woman began to share more about her world, describing her family, the land they lived on, and the customs that shaped her life. The rancher listened with rapt attention, asking questions when he could, and learning to understand the richness of her culture. In turn, he shared stories of his life on the ranch, the long days, the challenges of isolation, and the small joys that made the work worthwhile. They discovered common ground in unexpected ways, a love for the land, a respect for life, and a recognition of the strength required to endure hardship. As they spent time together, the rancher realized that their bond had shifted from caregiver and patient to something more balanced. They were partners in understanding, each learning from the other, each offering support and insight. He admired her courage and resilience, and she appreciated his patience, care, and quiet strength. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared experience of survival, a connection that transcended words and culture. The rancher also began to reflect on the lessons he had learned from the Apache women during their visit. He realized that compassion and courage were not always about grand gestures or heroic acts. Often, they were about quiet, consistent care, the willingness to listen, and the respect for someone else's autonomy. He understood that true courage could be measured by the capacity to act selflessly, to support another without expecting reward, and to honor the choices of others. One morning, the young woman asked to accompany him on a ride to check the farthest pastures. He hesitated at first, concerned for her safety, but she insisted, demonstrating the confidence and strength she had regained. Together, they rode across the open land, moving slowly, observing the cattle, and noting the condition of the fences. The wind was brisk, and the sun warmed their backs. In these moments, the rancher felt a deep sense of connection, not just to her, but to the land, the life they shared, and the trust that had grown between them. Throughout the following weeks, their relationship continued to deepen. They worked side by side, tended to the land, and shared stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. The young woman became more independent, yet remained grateful for his guidance and protection. The rancher, in turn, discovered new layers of empathy and understanding within himself. He realized that human connection, built on respect, care, and trust, was as vital as any task or responsibility on the ranch. One evening, as they sat watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky, the rancher felt a profound sense of peace. The young woman rested beside him, her presence quiet but reassuring. He reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from her near death in the canyon to her recovery, the visit of her family, and the choice she had made to return. He understood that life was fragile but also resilient, capable of healing and connection even in the most unlikely circumstances. He thought again of the words spoken by the matriarch. She chose you. The phrase carried weight, meaning, and recognition. It was not just about his actions. It was about trust, courage, and the bond that had formed through weeks of care and understanding. He realized that the choice was both a gift and a responsibility, a reminder that true connections are built on mutual respect, patience, and compassion. In the following days, the rancher and the young woman continued their quiet routine, strengthened by the lessons they had learned. They shared the labor of the ranch, attended to the animals, and explored the land together. Each day brought new understanding, new trust, and new moments of shared joy. The rancher marveled at her resilience, intelligence, and insight, and he felt honored to be part of her journey. The young woman, in turn, began to teach him aspects of her culture, small practices, ways of observing the land, and traditional remedies that could aid in healing. The rancher listened, learned, and applied what he could. Their exchange was reciprocal, a blending of experiences and knowledge that enriched both of their lives. Through these interactions, he came to understand that true wisdom often lies not in books or instructions, but in lived experience, observation, and the willingness to listen. As the weeks turned into months, the rancher realized that their connection had grown into something enduring. It was built not on dependency, but on mutual respect, understanding, and the shared experience of survival and care. He had learned to honor her autonomy, and she had learned to trust him completely. Together, they had created a bond that transcended words, culture, and circumstance, a quiet, steady, and meaningful partnership that neither of them had anticipated but both deeply valued. The rancher reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the moment he found her wounded and alone, he had acted out of instinct, compassion, and a sense of responsibility. Yet the experience had taught him far more than he could have imagined. He had learned patience, humility, and the profound impact of presence and care. He had witnessed the strength of her spirit, the depth of her culture, and the power of choice. And he had discovered that the bonds we form with others, when built on trust and respect, can shape and transform our lives in ways we never expect. Time passed slowly but meaningfully at the ranch. The young woman had fully regained her strength, moving with confidence and energy that reflected her recovery. The days were filled with work, tending the animals, repairing fences, checking pastures, and caring for the land. But now, they were accompanied by laughter, conversation, and moments of quiet companionship. The rancher had grown used to her presence, finding comfort in the routine they shared, and yet he knew that life was not static. Every day brought new awareness, new reflection, and sometimes the gentle realization that things must change. The young woman had grown more independent with each passing week, her resilience now fully visible to anyone who might see her. She could ride across the pastures alone, gather water from the stream, and even handle some of the ranch chores that had once seemed impossible. She had learned the rhythms of the land, the ways of the animals, and the patterns of the weather. Her movements were confident, her eyes bright with intelligence, and her voice had grown stronger as she expressed her thoughts and feelings more freely. The rancher observed her with quiet admiration, understanding that the bond they shared had helped both of them grow, and yet he knew that it could not last forever in its current form. He thought often of her family, of the Apache women who had visited and entrusted him with her care. He realized that their visit had not been just a moment of gratitude. It had been a lesson in trust, respect, and the power of choice. The phrase, "she chose you," echoed in his mind, reminding him that true connection comes not from possession or control, but from understanding, kindness, and respect for another person's autonomy. He knew that her journey was not his to decide. It was hers to navigate, and his role had been to support, guide, and protect. One afternoon, as they worked together mending a broken fence, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. She spoke slowly, using a mix of English and her own language, trying to explain something that had been on her mind. Though the rancher did not fully understand each word, he caught the intent. She wanted to discuss her future. She was ready to make a choice, not out of fear or obligation, but out of reflection and awareness. Her gaze was steady, her posture confident, and her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. He listened carefully, nodding, encouraging her to speak freely. It was a delicate moment, a conversation that required patience, empathy, and respect. He understood that this decision was about more than staying or leaving. It was about the balance between her independence, her connection to him, and her ties to her family and community. He felt a quiet pride in her courage, knowing that she was making a thoughtful, considered choice, not one forced upon her by circumstance or expectation. Over the next several days, they spent more time talking, exploring options, and reflecting on what mattered most. They discussed the land, the work, the animals, and the routines that shaped their daily life. They shared memories, small joys, and stories from their pasts. The rancher spoke of the long years of solitude he had endured, of the lessons he had learned from the land, and of the quiet wisdom that came from patience and observation. She shared her experiences, her family's teachings, and the resilience that had allowed her to survive against the odds. Each conversation deepened their understanding of each other and strengthened the bond that had grown between them. At times, the rancher felt a pang of worry. He knew that the world beyond the ranch would call to her, that her family would expect her return, and that her community could offer experiences and support that he could not. Yet, he also recognized that the connection they had formed was real, meaningful, and lasting. It was not a bond dependent solely on proximity. It was built on trust, respect, and shared experience. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful connections are those that allow freedom rather than impose constraint. Finally, the day came when a decision had to be made. The young woman approached the rancher, her eyes steady and calm. She spoke, her voice a mixture of confidence and warmth, explaining that she wished to return to her family and community, while maintaining a bond with him that could endure across distance. The rancher felt a mix of emotions, pride in her courage, sadness at the thought of her departure, and deep gratitude for the trust and connection they had shared. He nodded, understanding fully, and offered his support for her decision. The preparations for her departure were quiet and careful. The rancher helped her pack supplies, ensuring she had what she needed for the journey. He guided her to check the horses, to review the paths they would take, and to plan for the days ahead. The young woman's demeanor was calm, confident, and respectful, reflecting the growth and strength she had developed during her time at the ranch. She took care to express her gratitude, offering thanks for his unwavering support, protection, and kindness. Each gesture, each word, carried weight, reflecting the depth of their shared experience. As the sun rose on the day of her departure, the rancher and the young woman walked together to the edge of the ranch, where the path led toward her family's territory. The land stretched wide and open before them, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. The rancher felt the weight of the moment, knowing that this was both an ending and a beginning. He had been entrusted with her care, had guided her through recovery, and had shared in the growth of her strength and independence. Now, he would witness the next chapter of her journey, trusting that the lessons they had shared would carry her forward. Before she mounted her horse, the young woman turned to him, her eyes meeting his with clarity and warmth. She spoke softly, repeating the words he had once heard from her matriarch. "She chose you." But this time, they were directed at him, acknowledging the bond they had formed and the trust they had shared. The rancher felt a swell of emotion, realizing that their connection had transcended distance, culture, and circumstance. It was a moment of mutual recognition, respect, and gratitude that would endure beyond the physical separation that was about to occur. He helped her onto her horse, ensuring she was secure and comfortable. They rode together for a short distance, side by side, savoring the final moments of shared space before the path diverged. She paused to look back, and he nodded, silently offering reassurance, encouragement, and respect for the choice she had made. Then, with a wave and a determined look, she rode off toward her family's land, her figure gradually blending with the horizon. The rancher watched until she disappeared from view, the quiet wind carrying the echo of their shared experience across the open plains. The days that followed were filled with reflection. The rancher returned to his routines, tending to the land, the animals, and the chores that shaped his life. Yet he carried with him a deeper understanding of human connection, resilience, and compassion. He remembered the young woman's courage, the trust she had placed in him, and the lessons of patience, respect, and kindness that had defined their time together. These memories became a source of strength and inspiration, shaping the way he approached his work, his interactions, and his understanding of the world. He also reflected on the visit of the Apache women, whose presence had been both enlightening and humbling. They had taught him that care is not only about physical support, but also about trust, respect, and honoring another's autonomy. Their wisdom and guidance had been a vital part of the young woman's recovery, and their words, "She chose you," would remain with him forever as a reminder of the depth of connection that could exist between people. Over time, the rancher realized that the young woman's departure did not diminish the bond they had formed. It had evolved, growing into something enduring and resilient. The lessons they had shared, the importance of patience, trust, courage, and mutual respect, remained, influencing the way he lived and thought. He felt a quiet gratitude for the experience, understanding that the impact of human connection often extends far beyond the moments we share directly. He carried on with his life, but he did so with a renewed sense of purpose and awareness. The land, the animals, and the chores were no longer the sole focus of his attention. He had learned the value of empathy, the strength of human resilience, and the profound impact of small acts of kindness. These lessons guided him in subtle ways, shaping the way he interacted with neighbors, animals, and the world around him. Years later, the rancher would look back on that time with a mixture of nostalgia, pride, and humility. The memory of the young woman, the courage she had shown, the trust she had placed in him, and the choice she had made, remained vivid. He would remember the quiet mornings, the work shared, the conversations, and the laughter. He would remember the lessons of patience, respect, and compassion, and he would carry them forward in every aspect of his life. In the end, the story was not about possession or control, nor about fear or obligation. It was about trust, courage, kindness, and the enduring power of human connection. The rancher had learned that true bonds are formed through respect and care, and that allowing another person the freedom to choose is one of the greatest acts of compassion. The young woman's presence had changed him, and their shared journey had left a lasting mark on both their lives. And though she had returned to her family, the memory of her strength, wisdom, and trust remained with him, a quiet reminder of the extraordinary depth of human resilience and the transformative power of kindness. He knew that, in some way, their paths would always be connected, and that the lessons of that time would continue to guide him, inspiring him to live with patience, courage, and compassion for the rest of his days.